Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today we're talking with cinematographer Andy Strahorn about his work on the television show 911 Lonestar. Andy, on this podcast, I like to talk to working cinematographers, and that is not exemplified more than Andy as he got off set, started driving to a color session, pulled over to the side of the road, and called me to do the podcast. So big ups to Andy for fitting me into his schedule like that. So you'll have to forgive the sort of cell phone quality. But in the discussion, we talk about his sort of humble beginnings, as it were, in Australia. I really enjoyed hearing about his time as a projectionist. I'm kind of somewhat fascinated by the art of projection. The first film I did personal film I did out of film school was about my friend Michael Rousselet running the projector at USC, which was a side job he had. He's the guy who does 5-second films, if you know them. Anyway, Andy talks about that. He talks about the workman-like ethic that comes from the outback, which I thought was really fascinating because out here in LA it can get a little frou-frou, we're making magic here, whereas to him it seems it was a lot more like, we're just doing the work, which I really appreciate. I like that angle on filmmaking. And then obviously we get to talk about 911 Lone Star and the work he's doing on there. It's about firefighters, and so there's a lot of action happening there, about his approach to lighting specifically. Really interesting talk about contrast in lighting, and especially how sunlight, nature, provides its influence into his lighting style. So not going to take up too much time on this intro, but that's what's going on. So without further ado, let's hear from Andy Strahorn. Hello and welcome to Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today we are joined by Andy Strahorn, the DP of 911 Lonestar. How you doing, Andy?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
I am excellent. Where are you calling in from right now?
Well, as life would have it, I'm on the side of the road just before I go do colour tonight on Lonestar, one of the eps. So I just pulled off before heading over to the post house to do some colour.
Oh, wow.
One of the episodes.
Who's handling color for you?
MTI.
Okay, cool.
MTI in Hollywood. So doing that with Julio Garon over there. So Julio does a great job. So just finished shooting today and just lucky enough to have a chance to speak to you, and then just race off to do colour for several hours to finish the day.
Sure.
So yeah.
So we'll get to. I'm actually really interested in coloring, so we can get to that in a minute. But I was looking at your IMDb, and it looks like you're primarily in television. How'd you get started there?
Well, I starting back in Australia in the mid '90s, you start as a back then it was film. So it was, I started as worked my way up through, video split to second AC, first AC, and then DP, and then came to stateside and, for about, close to a decade, shot a lot of little independent movies, some okay, some not so okay, and you kind of meet, multiple people along the way, and next thing you know, you get an opportunity to get a break, and you're lucky enough to make the most of it, and sometimes it's fortuitous, and you go on from there. So it was just through contacts of these little independent cinema projects that I was lucky enough to meet line producers that then introduced me to showrunners and so forth, and then I got my break. So.
Sure. So were you always aiming to be a DP?
Oh yeah, mate. I was 7 or 8 years old. I lived in the outback in a small country town that had a small one-screen theatre And I knew when I saw Empire Strikes Back as a 7 or 8 year old that I knew what I wanted to do. But, back then in the early 80s in Australia, the opportunity and the industry isn't as prolific as it is here. So it seems more remote and pipe dream back there because it wasn't an industry that was sustainable. And so it's like, well, how the hell do I do that? And so it was, being back there and working in the industry, it just it taught you to be very versatile and persistent,
Sure.
to get in and to try to make headway,
Yeah. Did you started off making just like short films with friends, or how did because I know for me it was a whole lot of, I've got a camera here. We can edit. I started on VHS before I went to film school and shot 16, and that was a whole lot of shooting stuff in sequence and not being able to put it on a computer to edit.
Yeah, well, it was something like that, man. It was I was around 20 years old, 19 when I first started, and back then it was video 8mm, it was literally, I grew up in a small country town, and there was literally no one other than what we had, local stringers that shoot news and racehorses and things like that. So I would go do work experience, but the same theater that I saw Empire Strikes Back, I ended up working in as a cleaner. So when people say, what is the lowest position you can start? It's not a production assistant. It's a cleaner of a cinema.
Yeah,
and then you work your way up to, Usher and Candy Bar and then Projectionist. And that's how I started. So I literally just watched things like Braveheart and True Lies and Forrest Gump like 80 times and just... we'll just watch the lighting, and then would go get a video camera and try to make my own little film. You were so much of a sponge that you just couldn't get enough of it, so to speak.
Sure.
So that's how I started. So it was very humble beginnings.
Yeah.
And sometimes innocence and ignorance is actually a really good thing.
Totally. Yeah. I know for sure when I thought I wanted to get into cinematography, I was actually confused. I wanted to get into prop making. I thought, speaking of Empire Strikes Back, I thought, the snow troopers were the coolest thing in the world. I thought the lightsaber, Han Solo's blaster, those were all so cool. And for some reason in my head, I went, yeah, that's film. You gotta I want to be the camera guy. I don't know where I put those two together.
Yeah, me neither. I just remember, sitting there at 7 or 8, and I obviously you can't articulate, but you just, for that 90 minutes to 2 hours, you're like, I want to do that. And I don't know what that is, but I want to do that. And I want to kind of put the camera there and do that. And so it was something over time that obviously gestates and it grows and develops, and then you start to understand what does it really entail. And from that going forward, I'm glad that, that genesis happened at such a young, early age, because, we all grow up with friends in different avenues of life. And it's interesting to just, I feel very fortunate that I knew what I wanted to do, even though the path to get there was somewhat convoluted, but I just knew that's what I wanted to do,
Yeah. What was your experience like being a projectionist?
It was great when it worked. If if the film got jammed and it's spitting it out at 24 frames a second and it just, it's chewing it up, it's like, there's a few colorful expletives that are usually followed, but it was great. It was just, I felt I was very, very lucky because you would get the old canisters and, you'd get them in 2,000 foot spools and you'd tape them together and join them, and it was really cool handling film. And even though, again, I was so far removed from the execution of what that is, it was still somewhat this, essence that, well, you're touching film, you're somewhat part of it,
Sure.
So it was definitely something that in the early days, it was, it was a lot of fun just to be, even though it was a bit naive, to think that you're part of the industry. It was just a different side of it. It was obviously distributing as opposed to, exhibition as opposed to production. But it was a lot of fun, and it was really cool. And it was just something pretty magical just to hear that flicker, much like years later, operating and then shooting and hearing the sound of film run through the magazine to your ear. It was, that's one thing I do miss, is hearing that sound. That's for sure.
Totally. Yeah, when I was, like I said, when I was in film school, we got to shoot 16 millimeter, and you do start to, especially when things go wrong, like just little simple things, you hear the mechanism kind of change sounds.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh no, right in the middle of a really great take, you just have to sit there with your face in the eyepiece and just eat it.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that sometimes that, it definitely, I didn't really have too many mishaps, but it was nonetheless, it was pretty cool. I got paid to sit and watch films through a porthole, and that's essentially what I did. I just literally, like a sponge, just tried to soak up, and literally that was my early beginnings of a very rudimentary film school of looking at an image and trying to follow where the shadow was, and then trying to ascertain, well, if there's a shadow there, even if it's soft or hard, then that means the light source must be coming from the opposite direction.
Yeah. How were you when you were looking at that? When you started, like really trying to figure out lighting, what sort of tools were you kind of running into? I assume you just hit the hardware store and grabbed something, or were you just no lights for the first 12 projects or whatever?
Oh, well, I was lucky enough, as I said, I worked as work experience for a couple stringers at rival networks that would shoot local news and whatnot. And so I was lucky enough that, you go carry around the tripod for them, and, they see that you're keen. They had a little Toto lighting kit and a redhead and a blondie. And,
Yep.
it was funny because I thought they were the bigger lights that I would never ever need ever again. Now you use those to light a catering tent. But it's so I would get those, and you learn that there is things that are film retardant, fire retardant, and I just thought, well, back then, to recreate what Russ Carpenter did on True Lies, you just put a blue filter on the lamp. Again, I had no influences, and this is pre-internet and all that type of stuff. So totally. I would, I just went, like you said, I went to a news agency and foolishly and stupidly, got blue cellophane.
Oh, jeez.
And you got to understand, I was 17, 18 years old when I started this. So, and then I threw that over a lamp, and, you make it all nice and neat and tidy, and it looks pretty. And then you turn the thing on, and within a second it's on fire. And, you're patting down the light, not realizing there's 240-volt power running to a lamp. But, you live and you learn. And luckily nothing bad happened. But, there's a couple little funny things like that on the way that you just go, well, I'm not doing that again. So,
sure. Can you point to like the first sort of break that you remember coming through where you felt like, oh, now I'm in?
Well, I remember what got me to the United States was an independent film, and that was probably the thing that started the ball, particularly stateside. Was an independent film with Peter and Michael Spierig back in 2001 called Undead. And it was, at the time, I was just about to finish. You're moonlighting on the weekends shooting, but I was finishing up being a first AC at that time, and
Gotcha.
I was just about to do a 9-month series, and a month in, these blokes called me up and said, "Hey, listen, we've got this horror feature. It's 8 weeks worth on Super 16, but it's all deferred." But these guys were successful commercial directors, and I knew it was going to be somewhat stylized. And I just jumped at the chance, and I said, "Yep, I'll do it." And went to my UPM's office for the TV series and said, "Hey, I have to quit." And they're like, "Why?" And I said, "Well, been offered a job to shoot a feature, my second feature, and I was 25 at the time, and I was like, this is why I got in the business. I want to do this." And they said, "Well, are you making good money?" I said, "No, they're not paying me until it makes money." And they said, "Well, wait a minute, you're going to give up 9 months worth of work for no money right now?" And I said, "Yep." And they were like somewhat taken back and was like, "Look, go do the show, come back in 8-10 weeks and your job will be here." So, but fast forward 3 years later, that movie came out because of the visual effects that needed to be done on it. Took a year to 15 months. That released in the States, limited with Lionsgate in mid to late 2005. And then I just came over. And once I was here, I was shooting commercial work in Australia. Things were starting to happen with directors in Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. And I just thought, if I go back, I'll never come back stateside. So I just stayed and got renewed my visa and kept renewing, and then went for the O1 and got that and started from scratch here.
Totally. When you, obviously you weren't just rolling project to project, unless you were, but how were you managing between sort of the bigger projects? Were you like still doing commercials out here, or side gig, or what was that like?
No, when I first came here, it was very, working class, humble beginnings. I started off, moving furniture, doing labor work, and
Sure.
whatever you could do under the table. And then the one thing that I was very fortunate about in Australia was it taught you the hustle. So there's always there's no door closed. It's just everything's slightly ajar. And, you learn how to, a no really means you just got to ask in a very polite manner,
Yeah.
And so, it was just, back then how do I get a job? Well, I just went to IMDb. I looked up every production that was being made in pre-production, and I would just go literally from top to bottom and look at who the producers were, the directors, and click on their companies. And if they had their emails, I'd cold email them. And that's how I started. And for every 100 emails, I would usually get 3 to 6% back, 3 to 6 of them. So that's how I started, and I would do 3 or 4 movies a year.
Do you think that strategy would work today, just cold emailing companies like that?
I think to a degree that, those were movies $1 million or less. So
sure,
and
those are rare now.
Yeah, and I think that's that was a different time. I think once you start getting above that, they're obviously non-solicited. You're never going to get an answer. So, for that time, it was more of a case of, well, there's a sense of ownership. If I'm not working and not doing what I want, then it's on me to make that to make the change. I can't, rely on anyone else to do it. And so what Australia taught me so much that you got to be versatile, you got to be malleable, you got to be fast, you got to be easy to work with. All of those attributes seem to pay dividends as you start to make ground. Then people always call the previous producer, "Hey, what was this bloke like? What was this like?" from there you start to get a roll on, you know.
Totally. What that's actually interesting because I've spoken to a couple Australian DPs and they all do seem to have the same kind of like idea, maybe not idea, but you're just shoot. It's work. You know, it's not. There isn't that sort of hoity-toityness about it. Is there anything else that Australia taught you about doing the work and kind of that LA doesn't seem to have that sort of faux fanciness?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot left over from the British that we borrow, but I still to this day call DPs cameraman, and it's lost in translation with ADs because they'll say the camera operator, no, the cameraman, and so I think that there's no mystique or anything like that, or reverence to the industry back home because it's so small. It's really a tiny industry. So it kind of, I think the landscape and the culture in general is this kind of, if you injure yourself, you'll be right, mate. Just get up and walk it off. I mean, our national sport in summer is cricket. There's no gloves. Our national sport in winter is football, full contact, no pads. Right. So it's kind of like this culture that's kind of like just get on with it. If there's a problem, how do you fix it? So it's kind of like you're just brought up not knowing any different, that this is just what you do, So it's kind of, I think it really, serves a great purpose in just being adaptable because, as you know, there is no filmmaking utopia. You're always going to be fighting weather, light, time, producers, money, actors. You're always going to be in that situation. And all of us have the same tools. We have a camera, we have lenses. Yeah, you might have a bit of gear here and there or what have you, or different lights. But essentially, at the end of the day, what really separates everyone is their problem solving. And that's all it is. It's just problem solving.
That's actually a good sort of segue into the work you're doing now, because I haven't actually spoken to a lot of television DPs. That compressed schedule has got to be really educational when it comes to moving quickly and being adaptable.
Yeah, it definitely, I'm enjoying it right now. Just from the, the consistency of problem solving and working 2 steps ahead and all that type of stuff. And particularly on our show, the previous show I did was Lethal Weapon. It was very different. It was a cop buddy drama based off the movies with Mel and Danny. But, this show Lonestar that I'm doing right now is really interesting with, your firefighters are wearing black turnouts or black uniforms, and the design of some of the sets and pieces are this very soft pastel tones. And then so how do you, it's that, how do you create contrast and tone of the scene when you're dealing with such extreme values, so that is a very, to me, that's a great challenge. And then obviously each actor, we have Caucasian, we have African-American, we have Hispanic, we have British. So you have all these varying degrees of tonality with skin tone and making that work and shooting them in a way, particularly with the way this show works, the camera moves a lot. So it's, the intention behind all that was that the camera was always with the 126 characters, and that whether they're skylarking around together in the firehouse or on an emergency or at home, you always feel like you're with them as opposed to standing back and just observing them.
Sure. So a lot
Yeah.
of handheld then?
No, we don't do handheld on this show. We do more
Oh,
steady cam, Ronin, crane, a lot of crane, dolly. So it's just a mix of all of those, of those, tools to, to create the energy and the through the lens,
sure. And for lighting, obviously, like you said, the different as cinematographers are all pretty much focused on skin tones all the time and contrast on the face. What does that sort of lighting challenge look like for you? Because I know with darker tones, you kind of want to use larger, sort of softer sources to more reflect in the skin. Lighter skin tends to absorb light a little bit better. If that not literally, but how are you approaching that? I can't imagine you're flagging off individual actors.
No, not at all. I mean, sometimes we'll put in a little special here and there, but for the most part, it's more about, particularly with the way, PJ Russ is my DIT on the show, and we came up with a system based off our lead actor, what worked for him skin tone wise, and so we came up. The original show is obviously successful in its own right. And we said, well, we're not going to do part 2 of that. This is let's do a standalone. So we kind of came up with the approach. When I think of Texas, I think of copper during the day, this kind of dryness that kind of reminds me of Australia. And then at night, this kind of silver metallic tinge to stuff. So it has these cooler hues at night and kind of, yellow, brown, copper during the day in the skin or in the vegetation. So greens appear more olive. The skies, the blue appears more pastel blue as a result, more of a warmer blue. So, with that being said, a lot of our look, because we're dealing with such extreme values of skin tone versus costume, we basically come at it from a point of view of really creating a very dense negative in the midtones. So
Sure.
all of our contrast comes in the midtones, and the blacks and the highlights, we don't really push around too much, because otherwise you get blocky in the shadows and in the highlights. So a lot of our negative is very thick in the mids, and then we pull that all down. And that gives us the illusion of contrast, but you still see texture in the wardrobe, in the black wardrobe. So so as a result, to your point, there's a lot more, broader lighting to some degree, but then there's also it's a combination of specular lighting here and there too, primarily because some of our sets are either pastel in tone or have a lot of glass, so you're shooting straight into glass, or have a lot of darkness. So it's kind of, there's not one size fits all with the approach, because each set and each location really has to have a different approach in order to how do I attack this now. So, but it is a combination of a little bit of specular lighting. Sometimes I'll basically light with big, broad, soft sources, but then I'll also light from the same direction with a little bit more of a specular, harder source with an exposure contrast difference. And I also create contrast not only through lighting and exposure, but color. So as it gets darker in exposure, I'll start shifting the hue to cooler. So that gives us some sort of, almost like a two-prong effect, not only exposure, but color, to give us 2 layers of contrast.
Yeah. Are you kind of on the new LED everything train, or are you still using traditional sources?
Mate, I wish I was on the whole LED train, but we shoot it, through our studio. We obviously, it's on the studio light. Certain things are under what they call the cap, and what they'll give you a hell of a lot of, and then the other stuff, the new technology is somewhat sparingly. So it's a combination of the two. But definitely the advantages of LED, because I particularly love color. So the advantages of, obviously our S360s, S60s are our workhorses interior, because I like to play with color a lot. I don't see an environment being 56 or 32 or whatever. I see it as a multitude or layering of color. That's how I see the natural world. And that, to me, takes a little bit of the sting off the, sometimes digital can look synthetic and too clean. So having a little bit of dirt, in the color, sometimes to me makes it feel more, okay, I buy that this is real now. I buy that this exists, so I play with a color a hell of a lot. Again, very subtle, sometimes part of the same family. But to me, that approach seems to feel right, So, I might interiors play anywhere, a night sequence anywhere from, 2,800 to 5,000 and shoot at 3,200. And it just gives us that little bit of color separation. That also helps when you're using soft light, that little bit more of a subtle, soft contrast in that curve through the use of color.
Yeah, speaking of like the digital sharpness, what's your camera lens package, and are you filtering it all, or is it all pretty clean?
We use master primes. We carry zooms just when we're on techno, and they're the Fujinons. Great lenses. I use them on Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah, they're just amazing, mate. But the master primes, wow. I mean,
classic. It shot everything.
They're just beautiful, and particularly since we deal with, the one element of the show is fire, and
right.
just how clean that halation, next to zero halation, is pretty amazing. Now, when it comes to filtration, we sometimes, depending on the character and the setting, if it's at home or what have you, we might use black satins. But for the most part, it's out on the rescues and interiors at the firehouses and all that. I just want to keep it a little bit more of a realistic edge. And then when they take off their uniforms and they're at home or what have you, that's when it becomes a little softer, because the adrenaline's not up and they're not on edge and all that type of stuff. But
totally.
Usually the black satins is I just use for the ladies and just to take the edge off a little bit, because the master primes, beautiful edge to edge, great resolving power, but a little sharp, which is great, but it's just sometimes just takes that off just a little bit, which I think gives a bit more of a pleasing result.
Totally. And you're shooting Alexa or Venice or what?
We're shooting Alexas, mate, and Alexa minis, and just we've got 4 of those, and we're lucky to have one we basically a camera basically lives off the A360 head, the Aeroflex 360 head, and now with COVID, it's an interesting scenario landscape that we're all in right now. We're all working through. So generally speaking, we're using more and more A and B cameras or remotes, and just the dolly grips near the actors. So
gotcha.
That allows us, again, distancing and all the rest of it, and it allows us to, put less people in a confined area, if you will.
Yeah, and so does that mean that you're operating with like remote wheels or something like that? Yeah,
mate. Yeah. I'm a, if there's one thing there's nothing more pretty in this world than a geared head or some wheels. To me, it's just
totally.
You jump on there, you do a couple stars or hexagons, and then you're away to go. And it's just, to me, it's just, there's something about the precision, and depending on who the operator is, some people breathe heavy and some people don't. And I always felt when I operated on O'Connors or Sacklers or Ronfords, I always felt like I needed the most amount of, resistance, because I like to keep it as solid as possible. And that's the beauty of wheels, is that if you don't turn that wheel, that camera doesn't move. And I think there's something really deliberate about that and the choices an operator makes when framing the action or letting the actors play the frame.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm in the same boat. I think, I don't know, I assume the handheld thing started when cameras started to get smaller, but I was raised watching films that were very composed, very sort of proscenium, solid movement, that kind of thing. And that's what I want to emulate personally, if I can.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way, mate. And I think also too, what's dangerous is, you never want to give people the option that, oh, we got out of a bind because we just slap on a handheld camera and we run around, right. all of a sudden. Look, I think all cinematographers this day and age, regardless of budget or scale, I think we're all in that same boat where I think, unfortunately, cinematographers' position in the world has somewhat been diminished with this great things that have come from digital. But it used to be something that only cinematographers understood: what happened in the bath, what happened when it went to the lab, what printer
right.
lights, 32, 23, 35 meant on printer lights, those types of things. It was like a mystery. It was like this magic sort of concoction. Now that everyone can see it, it's kind of taken out. Sometimes there's a bit of a committee meeting with regards to people going, well, can't you fix that in post? Or, no, it looks fine to me, And so, that loss of control, I think it's up to every DP to try to stand his or her ground for the image, because really we're the only people standing in the way of the process of going, let's do it faster, cheaper and quicker and easier, Totally. So we're the last custodians, and usually the people are like, oh, how long is this going to take? It's Friday night. It's 1:00. Can't we just do, So, you're usually the person that's going, no, we've got to do this right. Let's just give me 10 minutes, give me 20 minutes, So, it's one of those things that it's the last frontier that if it serves the story, then it's a great way to shoot. If it doesn't, and it's just because of ease, then I think it's a very slippery slope to entertain.
Sure. And I think another thing too is it can become dangerous when people think they know what your job is and start making suggestions or speaking for you to whatever, the producer, director, or something like that. Oh no, he can, like you said, he can fix it in post.
Absolutely. And the truth of the matter is, mate, in my experience in episodic, is that, I've done 2 action shows back to back over a 5-year period, but you're shooting anywhere for a 43-minute screening. You're shooting anywhere from 400 to 600 shots in 43 minutes. So the idea of fixing it in post doesn't exist, because to me, you got to get it right, and then you just fine tune in the color, and you're just really doing the fine tuning at that point, as opposed to a total, well, I only have 16 or 20 hours to color time 600 shots. It's a one light at best, right. So you're not doing yourself any favors or the show any favors with that kind of approach.
Yeah, there was a quote that I found recently that really stuck with me, which was, if you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to fix it?
Hey, that's a really good line. That's a really good line.
Feel free to take it. I took it from someone else. Starting kind of where we started at the beginning of the chat, because I know you got to go soon. Talk to me about your color grading process. You said you had a DIT on set. Do you guys have like a worklet, or is he constantly riding the wheels for you? And when you go meet up with him in a bit here, what kind of conversations are you having?
Yeah, we, PJ and I, when we're at the station, we have a lot in the CDL we stand by, but because the locations and the sets one is more tan and earth tone, and then another one has more color in it, and then one has really dark tones. So one LUT doesn't really suit everything. So there is several different LUTs that we have, and I'm a big stickler for time of day, and it's very subtle, but to me, 5 a.m., pre-dawn, dawn, 30 minutes after dawn, an hour and a half after dawn, 2 hours after, to me, there's a shift in color palette with regards to color temperature and the way that looks and what that does to a set. So there's very much a consistency in a line that we take, and then just, adjust for each different set. But, on top of that, time of day is a really big thing that I really put a lot of emphasis on. So, it's very subtle. You'd really have to look for it. But to me, I see it with regards to, you want to see this transition of time, even though an episode might be shot over 4 or 5 days, screen time, that is, you want to feel that it's real by having different times of day. So, and then from there, I'll go in with Julio with Final Color, and then I'll just give him a background of the episode. We'll talk about it first for about 20 or 30 minutes, and then I'll talk, then we'll go through, and essentially we'll go through each scene, and we'll pick a shot, and then we'll just tweak from there and go, okay, let's, do this, that. And usually for the most part, it's really fixing up, it's a little bit of, isolating a window here or a qualifier for color here to pull down, because in our world, reds are burgundies, blues are more of a pastel, warm blue. And greens are more of an olive. So we kind of just qualify things, pull them apart, and then put them back together. So it's pretty much just fine tuning. It's very little to do with color. Once I get to the final color, we pretty much stay consistent to getting it right on the day of. And then it's just okay, tweaking the curve here and there, but it's all very small stuff at that point.
Yeah. How, this is actually a question I should have asked earlier, but how has the process how has digital changed the way you shoot versus film? Because obviously the digital is 2 parts, right? You've got the camera and then you've got the DI, whereas with film you had the negative, and then you had color timing, but it wasn't as targeted as it is now.
Yeah, and I'm caught in 2 worlds. Obviously, there's a beauty to film, and I think there's also a change in people and the crew's way of looking at execution. There's none of this, let's just keep the camera rolling. There's a kind of like this prestige of money just pouring through the magazine the more you shoot, and keep rolling without really necessarily fixing or fine-tuning or finessing. I love the idea that there was something beautiful about calling the dailies guy each morning and saying, hey, how did it look? How did dailies look? And finding that out and waking that up. I always enjoyed calling the next morning and waking up to that, and knowing that if it was more often than not a great phone call, then you're off with a bit more of a pep in your step to set. The thing I love about digital that film doesn't give is I love the immediacy of creating the world right there. And that to me is something really exciting, is that I can create and shift, and what would normally take 24 hours in the sense of sending notes to the telecine or the lab or what have you, I can do right there because the telecine and lab is right there. So I like that immediacy of doing that. And, to me, lighting is so immediate. My choices is so instinctual. Yes, logistically, you do lighting schematics and things like that for sets and big set pieces and all whatnot. But when it gets down to it, it's really just like cooking. You throw it in the mix and you go, I feel like this needs to be this color or this lighting value, because for no other reason than I feel it should be. You can't quantify anything more than that or explain yourself other than this feels right, this feels right, this feels right. And then, there's something great about that immediacy to me of the art of seeing it right there and then. So, I'm torn in between two worlds, but I do love that part of it as much as I used to love waking up in the morning at 5 a.m. and talking to the lab or telesim.
Sure. Well, and I guess the flip side of that coin is, waking up in the morning, hopping on the phone, and he goes, "Yeah, all the negatives were blank."
Well, yeah. I mean, luckily I never had that, but I just, it's, that's a very sobering thought where you probably open up the classified pages and go, you start looking for a job at that point, but
Yeah.
luckily I never had that situation. But, it's yeah, I mean, look, it's such an amazing job. And if you can really love what you do, it's just like, you're just 8 years old again. It's
Totally.
like you sit in the theater and you just, you get to all this and you're lucky enough that you get to play in a sand pit,
Yeah.
and, even the worst day, I know some of my mates that on Monday morning at 8 a.m., they wish it was Friday, 5 p.m., and
Sure.
I've never felt like that.
No, I'm the same way. I definitely I've been a DP for as long as I can remember, and I don't have weekends like that. It's always, I'm surrounded by it.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the last several years, I'm a huge football fan, diehard football fan, and usually Sundays is putting on some sweatpants, sitting on the couch with the computer doing lighting schematics for the next week, and whilst watching football. So,
Not a bad week. I do, before we let you go, I'm this is the I guess this would be the fourth podcast, and I'm trying to end them all the same way, which is asking, which everyday thing do you find most important that has helped you in your career that you're practicing these days, and if you have any personal projects that you're working on.
Yeah, I think the everyday thing, one thing that I love is I love getting up every morning, and when I leave, it's usually really early, either before dawn or whatever, and it amazes me the quality of light that changes every day, and just seeing it come through blinds or windows, and just this, I'm never surprised what light can do, and I'm always marveled that I think I'll spend a lifetime chasing it, and that's okay by me, and I'm quite happy to have a carrot 2 inches from my nose and keep thinking that I'm going to get it, so, but with regards to personal projects, no, I don't have anything right now. Obviously there's projects you'd like to work on in the future and directors you'd like to work with on the future, but, nothing right now. I'm just enjoying, I was lucky enough to shoot, car flips and explosions and shootouts and, high falls and all that with the previous action drama. And now with this, I'm shooting firemen and fire, and, so I don't know what's next, but I'm glad that I've gotten a chance to shoot different action, if you will. And I'm looking forward to doing more of that, but in a different way,
Totally. Well, I will let you get to your color session. Thank you so much for spending this time with me in your car. And I hope we can have you back next time you have something to talk about.
I really appreciate your time, mate, and thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk to you later.
All right, mate. Thanks heaps, mate.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So that is it from Andy and me. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. I certainly did. And once again, double thanks to Andy for fitting me into a schedule like that. That was very cool of him. Next week we'll have someone else. I don't know who it'll be. If I'm perfectly honest, there's like 6 people in the wind right now. So really exciting from that perspective. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. That was a good episode. So you'll hear from us next time. Take it easy. Thanks for listening. Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F&R Matbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the interview you just heard by visiting provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.